Right. Good evening and welcome to Let's Chat Internships, a discussion on the best practices for securing a college internship. We're so pleased to present this discussion in partnership with Destination Internship. I am Kelly Francis. I'm the Executive Director of Calculated Genius, a Chicago nonprofit dedicated to helping underrepresented youth connect to and explore the world of engineering to inspire a brighter future. Calculated Genius provides STEM plus programming for high school students, scholarships for females pursuing post-secondary degrees in engineering and computer science, and mentorship. This workshop discussion came from our STEMinist scholars. This year, we awarded $46,000 in scholarships to 17 amazing females who are studying engineering and computer science. And this is one of the topics that they identified as a need for career development support. We really look to demonstrate through example a pathway to sustainable, rewarding, and essential careers in STEM. You could find more information out on Calculated Genius on our website at calculatedgenius.org or through our media outlets. We would love for you to follow us. As I mentioned, our scholars identified this topic as important to them, and we turned to two individuals that we thought would be great to speak about their best practices. It is my pleasure to welcome Destination Internship co-founders Matthew and Michael Kadis, two current college students who are dedicated to using their experience and knowledge to help others. How impressive. I would love for you both to introduce yourselves, and if possible, can you share about the genesis of Destination Internship?
Sure, that sounds great. Thank you for the introduction, and I'll speak on behalf of Michael. We're both really happy to be here and share about our experiences. So my name's Matt. I guess you can see in the Zoom window by my name. My name is Matt. I go by Matt. I study electrical engineering at the University of Kentucky and have worked several internships. Most recently, I worked at SpaceX at their South Texas launch site, as well as Johnson & Johnson, Tesla, ExxonMobil, and John Deere. Mike?
Yep, thanks, Matt. So my name is Mike Kadis, and similar to Matt, I guess not actually anymore. So in terms of internship experiences, I'm currently working in product operations at Apple. And then over the past summer, worked at SpaceX along with Matt at their South Texas launch. Well, and next summer, currently looking at offers again at Tesla, Apple, McKinsey Consulting Group. Really excited to be here. Just feel free to stop us along this discussion in any way if you guys have any questions. I think we have a lot of different experiences in regards to engineering and STEM kind of across the board. Different roles and functions and companies. Thank you, Kelly, for setting this up and reaching out to us.
Absolutely. So I appreciate you both for being here. I think your experience, even Mike, for you to have as much internship experience in just a couple semesters in school, that's pretty phenomenal. And I think it kind of speaks to one of the myths that I wanted to throw out there. We often hear freshman or sophomore year is too early for an internship. What are your thoughts on that?
Our thoughts are it's definitely not too early. There's always opportunities out there and companies looking to hire. That said, even sophomore year, there's a lot of companies that like to develop their talent pipeline super early. So they specifically look for sophomores. But even if you don't end up with an internship or co-op during your freshman year or right after, at least it's still like money in the bank practice and experience that you get talking with people and going through sort of the repetitions that will eventually be helpful in the future when you are at a higher level in terms of your education and more qualified for other roles.
To add to Matt's point, I think he said repetition. There's two aspects that I think of when looking for internships freshman, sophomore year. Well, it's not needed. And if you don't get one, you're not necessarily behind the eight ball. It's good for two primary reasons. One, as Matt had expanded upon, practice, but then two is network building with recruiters. A lot of recruiters tend to be in their internship recruiting positions for several years. And so by creating an initial connection with them, your freshman or sophomore year, whether you land the internship or not, get familiar with your face, get familiar with your experiences. And because recruiters, it tends to get lost that they're people too. That they are individuals that remember who they interact with. And if you see the recruiter every time they're on campus, they will remember you. Or if you reach out to them every so often, and we can talk about that a little bit more, and if we go into networking. But I think it's important that they get to know you and know your interest in the company. And on top of that, they get to see you grow throughout college. So exposing someone to who you are and what your interests and passions are during your freshman and sophomore year is very important towards eventually landing internships during your junior and senior year, and potentially full-time jobs later down the line. That being said, I would shoot for the stars and definitely go for hoping to get an internship freshman and sophomore year. But if you don't happen to land one, do not be discouraged, because there's a lot of growth that happens just by getting out there in the recruiting cycle and getting familiar.
Thank you. I love that. And I agree, it doesn't hurt, to start building those connections, either with recruiters, even with professors. You never know what research opportunities they might have or that they might be working on. And if you start developing those relationships, that could be something that comes up down the line for you. So a little bit on the outline for today's discussion, we're going to talk about where to look for internships, applying for positions, what are some of the do's and the don'ts? What should you include in your resume? Is there formatting? What about the cover letter? For me, that was always like the time sucker of writing a cover letter and personalizing it for every job. And then best tips for networking in person, but also virtually, since we're kind of in this hybrid world of still during COVID and many people still taking precautions. But I think it would be great for you guys that have career fair opportunities coming up, or maybe some conferences. I know SWE was in person, for you to be able to talk about best tips for networking. And then lastly, preparing for interview day and what you could really do to set yourself up for success. Throughout the chat, feel free to ask questions. You could either go off mute or write it in the chat. This is really for you, and we want to kind of get to what you have questions about. All right, and so we talked about how it's not too early to gain experience and how that also looks valuable, your freshman and sophomore year, adding that to your resume. But how do you even find these opportunities?
Yeah, I think this is one of the big question marks that a lot of people have, like right off the bat. Like how do you find these? Because they're definitely out there. For me, a couple of the things that come to mind is a feature on Google called Search for Jobs on Google. I could send a link that provides a description. I can send that in the chat when I finish up talking, but also LinkedIn and company websites, sometimes other job boards I like to use. And if I were to say there was a hidden gem, your school's career center. Usually there might be one or two people working within the College of Engineering at your school who focus on getting students different internships or jobs, but also career fairs. That's a really important way of finding roles, because those are companies that are actually going to your school with the intent of hiring. But to backtrack and get more specific in some of those, that search for jobs on Google is a really neat feature that Google has. You can search in Google summer 2022 electrical engineering internships. And one of the first things that would pop up is a little blue window that shows jobs that were collected from different job boards on the internet and then compiled into one place. And once you expand this sort of search for jobs feature in Google, you can filter by different roles, different locations, different companies, industries. So that's a really, really powerful tool to get a lot of different roles in one place. So I like to do that when I do sort of broad searching, but then another interesting way to find roles is just searching for companies that do something you're interested in and then going straight to the company website on their career section. That's really, really powerful because a lot of times you'll find roles that you didn't even know exist at the company you're interested in working at. So those are a couple of the areas I suggest. Mike, do you have anything to add?
I would say, and again, Matt has great advice in terms of searching for roles over Google and other different sites. For me, a lot of what I have done was applying through the company website. And Matt had mentioned, sorry, excuse me, Matt had mentioned that, when you go through the company websites and see the different roles and opportunities that are there, sometimes you stumble across things that you may not have anticipated you would visit that career site for. For example, you may be looking for an electrical engineering position, but see a program management position open up, which was actually my specific case at one of the companies I interned with. And so I really like going onto the career site and being able to see exactly what types of jobs positions are open, because that way one of the most interesting things I've heard post interview after like getting an offer, kind of meeting with a company, was as much as the interview period is about the company interviewing you and seeing if you're a good fit, it is also you interviewing the company and seeing if they're a good fit for you. And I think that can kind of be extrapolated towards all parts of the recruiting process. Looking at the different roles and responsibilities and functions of internship positions listed on the website, you can kind of see which ones speak out to you and what opportunities are available. From that, I usually use that as kind of a jumping board into networking and kind of seeing, where would my place be at this company and what am I most interested in? So to me, the career site is definitely my go-to. But again, this is all just added on to what Matt had previously explained.
Yeah, I think I actually didn't know about the Google search for jobs, so that's really interesting. I think LinkedIn is also an amazing resource for students. And I think making sure that you kind of have an idea in mind of maybe a short list of companies that align with your values or something, if you're looking to find a job in sustainability in the future, something that matches that. Or if you know that you want to do tech for good. And so you're like trying to find organizations that their mission really speaks to what you're looking for. I think that would be really helpful. So they've understood. Oh, thank you, Matt, for sharing the link there in the chat. Hopefully everyone could see that. So now you understand about how to maybe search for internships. But now what advice would you give to students? They've maybe found a couple that they want to apply for. What's kind of the next step?
I would say the next step, once you figure out which ones you're looking to apply for, first and foremost is to fill out the application when you have that available. But that's kind of like the standard path in the book, is to apply and then wait for a response. I particularly like to be proactive in the recruiting kind of universe. And how I view that is, I mentioned seeing, what positions are open. And once you can identify that, like you mentioned, Kelly, what's next is I look for who are individuals, and I usually use LinkedIn for this, that currently have that position at the company, or what recruiters recruit for that position at the company. And usually it's kind of just fiddling around on LinkedIn to get messing with the right filters. But some helpful filters to have is looking at people based upon their current company, or, well, I guess in this situation, yeah, current company. And so say, I'll just use an example, a product management intern, right? And you're applying for that role. I would look into LinkedIn, product manager at the company that I'm interested in applying for, or product manager recruiting at the company that I'm interested in applying for. And usually that kind of directs you towards individuals who have a bit more say within the company. And in that, I usually reach out to them saying, hey, FYI, I applied to this position. The job number is whatever the job number is on the application. That's why I like going to the career site, because there's usually a job number. And so then they could know exactly what position you're interested in looking at and say, hey, here's my resume. I am really excited and passionate about your company for these reasons. Would you be willing to have a quick talk with me about this position? And from that point, hopefully they could go on to kind of recommending you, referring you, making sure your resume gets looked at. So definitely a proactive approach when it comes to submitting an application.
I agree with everything Mike said. And then also something he and I both agree on in terms of this application part and also finding the internships is having a process in place that works for you. The power of that definitely cannot be understated, because when you're in school, you have classes, you have personal commitments, you have the searching for internships, you probably have extracurriculars. So your time is already stretched pretty thin. And then to add to the mix, finding jobs, applying to jobs, and then eventually interviews, it can really be a time consuming effort. So one thing we really recommend is developing a process that works for you to most efficiently spend your time finding internships, but then also applying to internships. As an example, what my experience was and what I did my freshman year, basically all freshman year until March, when I actually the March of my second semester my freshman year, when I actually got my internship offer, I would spend my Sunday evenings just set aside 2 hours to just look for postings online, and I put them all into an Excel file. I copied the URL, put it into the Excel file, and then by the end of those 1 to 2 hours on Sunday night, I'd have maybe 20 postings, and then throughout the week, Monday through Friday, I'd spend maybe an hour or so each day applying to several of those positions. So that was sort of the well-oiled machine or process that I had developed to search for positions and then apply for positions. And that's what worked for me. And by actually blocking out the time on my calendar to do that, it kept me committed to the process. So I think that's another really important, I guess, aspect of this process is making sure you set aside the time to really search for the roles you're interested in and then apply to them.
I love that piece of advice. The only thing that I would add is for the Excel file, which I tend to love my Excel and Google Sheets and keeping track of things, but to also note if there's like a deadline date for the application, and you could maybe even arrange them by when the deadline is soonest or most approaching, so that you don't miss out on a potential opportunity. Because some of them will vary. Some will be only open for a short period of time. Even some companies dedicate a certain number of internship opportunities to specific universities or different groups. So that's just something to keep in mind while you're preparing to apply. Another thing that I have a question about, should students be including GPA? I mean, I think half of our students are freshmen, the other half will be sophomores. So maybe at the freshman level, they don't even have a determined GPA yet. And otherwise, like if you're a freshman, what experience should they be including on their resume?
In regards to the GPA, I would suggest always include the GPA. First semester freshman year, while you don't have an official GPA, I believe I used my high school GPA and clarified that it was my high school GPA. And then, so kind of how I had my resume set up was like my college, Purdue University, and then below that was my high school, because I was a freshman and I didn't have much going on at Purdue. And I had kind of along the same line as my high school GPA. But then in a similar format for college, I put like GPA colon N-A, right? So not applicable, just because, and the thing is, as I mentioned before, recruiters are people too. They understand it's your first semester freshman year, so you don't have a GPA. So like, don't feel pressured to even put a GPA at all. because they understand that you don't have a formal one in college. That being said, after your freshman year or after your first semester freshman year, I would always include your GPA just as a measure of accountability. Even, if it's great, if it's a great GPA and you're really proud of it, that's a great talking point, and that's something to definitely let them know. If it's a GPA that where you knew you could do better, that could definitely come up in a conversation, and you can spin it as a positive, talking about how you faced some of your biggest challenges and definitely learned how to overcome them. So I would always see your GPA as try and always include your GPA and figure out how you can speak to it as best as possible, depending on how you feel about your GPA. And then to your second point in regards to speaking on experience, I think some unique, like I would pick your most unique experiences that separate you from the pack. How I attacked my freshman year internship hunt was looking at, kind of accepting I know I'm a freshman and I don't have much university level experiences, but what have I done in the past that makes me different from the other candidates that they'll see? And that will make me kind of like the most intriguing or memorable among them. So it may not be, your core engineering build experience or a software program experience where you built and designed a software that you might get during a test or a lab or during a class, during a lab, during research opportunities or some extracurricular. But it may be something that adds towards developing your character, developing your personality, or helping them understand what type of employee, person, and teammate you would be.
Yeah, and to add on to Mike's point, there's really nothing too small that could be used in terms of experiences, because you can always bring an experience to life. It's really all about the story that you tell with that experience and the just what it brings to you as a candidate. I think that's more important. How the experience has inspired you and the way you act and behave and are able to do work.
I love that. So they are setting up their resume. They have it all set. What about their cover letter? Are there any items that you think they should maybe point out or highlight when they're including the cover letter?
So Mike, were you going to talk? Okay. So cover letter is an interesting thing because for me personally, I don't use cover letters. I would rather spend the time that it takes to write a cover letter doing other things. For example, just looking for new roles or applying to more roles. But that said, there are specific instances where a cover letter could really separate you, or where a cover letter is required and you have to do it. And the thing is, if you don't do that cover letter and you don't do it well, then you're out of luck because you might get dinged for that. So from my experience, I usually do cover letters in the outline is usually 3 paragraphs, an introduction about myself, my experiences and what that brings to the table. And then the third is just a conclusion on why I'm interested in the company. I don't know if Mike, you use a different format, but really I think the key to the cover letter is having it really well structured, easy to follow, organized, and basically just really expressing your interest, because that's at least my experience with it.
And to go off of Matt's point, I think there's been instances where my cover letter has been required. And the reason that we usually think that the focus on the cover letter being so time consuming is because your cover letter is very geared specifically towards the company. I'm sure some of you might have heard of tailoring your resume towards the position that you're applying for. Some people just have one resume. Others may have a resume for hardcore engineering, like electrical engineering, where you may have another resume for a bit more of a business related role, just depending on how you word your experiences and which ones you highlight. But for the most part, though, resumes can kind of be applied to multiple situations, whereas a cover letter, you're really focusing on why am I interested in this company? is kind of like the main goal of a cover letter, and why would I be a great fit. And in terms of Matt's structure and how I structure my cover letter, I would say I structure it very similarly. I begin with an introduction about myself, and then a little like sentence regarding my relevant experiences related to the specific job posting that I'm applying for. And then my second paragraph is talking about why I'm interested in this particular company or firm. Following that second paragraph, I add a little break to kind of, rather than have it just be like a 3-paragraph letter, I actually break out into 3 bullet points after the second paragraph. So usually companies have core values or things that they embody, whether it's, I mean, for example, some of them may be critical thinking, teamwork, and, integrity. And that may be 3 of their core values. So I would have 3 bullet points, and at the start of each bullet point in bold, have one of those core values, and then share a couple sentences about how I've embodied that in my past experiences, or something, kind of one of the values or characteristics that they specifically say is required to be successful and embrace that company, or what that company values. I really hone in to say, here is a brief snapshot of my experiences as to why I'm a great fit for your company. And then I kind of tie it together with a very brief conclusion, kind of saying, looking forward to hearing back from you, very, very general things. But I really like having the 3 bullet points there regarding core values or key characteristics to be successful in the position, because a lot of the time cover letters are very copy and pasted, kind of fit for the scenario. But I feel like this one, it allows them, it gets rid of the paragraph by paragraph formatting by having that physical separation of the bullet points. But then B, it also gives them a snapshot to show that you're a little bit deeper than just, why am I interested, a copy and pasted cover letter that they probably get from many other applicants. So I like having that structure to it, and making it a little bit more unique and flashy to kind of catch their eye.
I love that. That's a great tip. And I think it also makes the recruiters think that you really took the time to look at what the company values as well, especially if you're tying it to the traits that you have that kind of go along with that. So I love it. Another quick tip that I would just share is to make sure you look at the specifications on the application. Some of them will show Microsoft Word required, but the majority these days do not. And I would say PDF is typically the way to go. A lot of them have a software system that will be scanning it, and sometimes with Word, it will get jumbled or messed up or won't even kind of translate over correctly. So just keep that in mind. Unless they specifically require a Word document, I would strongly recommend that you upload a PDF.
Yeah, I would add to that with the cover letter and resume. Definitely, the PDF is the way to go when you have to upload that. Usually, it's like a little box where you have to attach files in the application, and almost always, 99% of the time, I attach my resume, and when I do cover letter, it's the PDF. Yeah, PDF is the way to go, and usually, what I've heard is it's easier in the system to do in the background with whatever system goes on.
Yeah. So they find the job or the internship opportunity that they want to apply for. They have everything prepared, they submit it, but then they're kind of like lost in limbo or waiting. Like, what could they proactively do to maybe follow up on their application?
In terms of proactively following up on the application, I think, yeah, I definitely understand, like, because when you submit your application, you kind of wonder, like, where does it go? And then, like, in some regards, I'm not sure how many of you seen the Polar Express, but I think like all of like the Christmas letters and tubes kind of get like routed towards like the end of the movie. I think of that as in like resumes. And actually, like, that's probably like how it works. Like when you apply for this job, there's a recruiter on the other end who specifically is recruiting for your position. And in many ways, how they have that Christmas letter mail room, they get that resume is routed because you applied to that position. And ultimately, though, from what I've heard talking with recruiters, at least in the companies that I've talked to, that the recruiters have access to like your resume, all like recruiters, regardless of what position they've applied for. But in terms of proactive steps, that's where I would look for recruiters at that specific company over LinkedIn, or any, working with your career counseling or with your university to see if they have any ties to recruiters that work at that company, just to be able to get in contact with them and to let them know, hello, I'm very interested in this position. I didn't just apply on the whim. I love this company for XYZ reasons, and I'm interested in the position for these other reasons. And I submitted my application. I know there's plenty of applicants, but I want to make sure that mine gets reviewed. And I've said that several times, and it's been well received every single time. They really appreciate you reaching out and being proactive, because it makes their job a lot easier too, because they can actually look for your resume and say, this person's very interested. Like, I understand that they like this company. It's kind of, you already go through that first screening process with them before them even having to think without knowing you. What do they think about you in a piece of paper? Their first perception of you gets to be like, you present that rather than them just looking at your resume on the screen. They get to see, oh, like, I've talked to Mike over LinkedIn or over the phone, and now I see his resume. So you kind of get to control like what that first perception is. And it allows them to be able to actually find your resume specifically and make sure that you get evaluated. Because a lot of the time, like, I feel like you can just get lost in like tens of thousands of applications.
Yeah, so just to add to that, I guess, like if I were to summarize what Mike said, if there's anybody you know at the company and it's been a while since you applied, just reaching out with a simple email, phone call, or LinkedIn message, if you're connected on LinkedIn, can go a real long way. At least in my experience, like for one internship, there was somebody I knew at the company, and I had asked them to write me a letter of recommendation. And so that, I think, definitely helped when I was applying there. So any like little connection that you have with somebody at the company, if you do, reaching out can't hurt you. It can only help, at least in our experience.
To add, this is where kind of how we talked about in the beginning of the call, freshman and sophomore year is important for developing relationships with recruiters. If you have a recruiter's phone number or LinkedIn or email, these are situations where you can quickly email them because you've already kind of introduced yourself and built that relationship, or they're kind of familiar with you and they wouldn't mind connecting and reaching out. So always kind of looking to build your network with recruiters is important. Also, if you happen to find a recruiter and say you've never met anybody at this company before and you're a sophomore or freshman applying for this position, and you reach out to a recruiter, they will be willing to talk to you and help you, though your resume may not be developed right now for this particular position. That's how you kind of start getting a network and building a relationship with that recruiter. So next year, after you've been involved in extracurriculars, after you've maybe had some research or other work experiences, and your resume may be a little bit more developed, if that's what the recruiter was looking for, you have their contact again for when you apply again. Say, hello, this is what I've done since we've last talked, and I feel I've really grown in these areas, and it makes me a great applicant. So again, it's kind of being in touch with people and recruiters and managers is a great way to always increase the chances of improving visibility of your resume.
I love that. And I think even if you don't necessarily have a connection who's in the recruiting space, looking at potential connections that are at a company, because sometimes they get referral bonuses, or even would just be happy to help you. It could be a connection of someone who went to your high school or who's at your current university, or even someone who's in your classes and happened to already land an internship. And so I think for them to be able to recommend someone that they've worked with or have a relationship really does speak wonders about your characteristics. The other thing I kind of just wanted to talk about, is there anything that we've talked a lot about the power of LinkedIn, not only for searching for jobs, but searching for recruiters and potential connections. What tips might you have for any of our students who maybe don't have a LinkedIn profile just yet, or they aren't fully kind of utilizing the social media network?
I would say the best path forward is just dive into it, make a LinkedIn profile, make an account, fill it out, and complete it as much as you can. For those that aren't familiar, it's sort of like Facebook, except for work. You're sharing, instead of the day at the beach that you had on Saturday, it's the past 5 years of work that you had is what you're sharing. And that's the goal, for you to be able to share that about yourself, and then for you to be able to see what other people have done and really use it to find any jobs that might be available, or like Mike and I keep talking about, networking and building relationships with people. So for really what I'd advise is just diving into it and building out a profile as much as you can, and even spending time in the search bar searching for people that might be in roles that you're interested in, to learn what their past experiences were. Maybe read about the types of roles they've previously worked in. A lot of people will have little descriptions underneath their job title to say what they did at that role. So exploring other people's profiles to get an idea of how they craft theirs.
And to add to that as well, if you don't have a LinkedIn or moving off of LinkedIn, the university, like your university's career centers, could potentially have connections for you, or other partners or organizations, engineering organizations or clubs, or kind of any social community or group may have connections of people at a company, or you know anywhere there. It's kind of, networking is an interesting thing, because as you meet people, you never know who comes from where and what backgrounds they might have. And so just by nature of talking, meeting people, and talking with people about your goals and aspirations, and where you're kind of looking and what you're interested in, could end up routing you towards a friend of a friend who works at a company that you're interested in. And by that, you then have that connection. So I think there's plenty. LinkedIn is like kind of like the center where its purpose is to kind of connect you professionally. But away from LinkedIn, it can really happen anywhere across any medium. And it's incredibly interesting. I mean, I've had personal connections and referrals from like my one of my best friend's dad's friends, where like I started talking with my best friend's dad after like one of our football games, and he had a friend who was doing something that I was interested in, and we connected from that. And so it can kind of happen spontaneously anywhere at any time. It's just, kind of communicating, what are you interested in? What excites you? What are you passionate about? And kind of, where do you want to look towards seeing yourself? Where do you see yourself in the future, and where do you want to go? There's plenty of opportunities to do that, whether it's university career centers, friends, family, organizations that you're a part of, like Calculated Genius, and yeah, and kind of going from there, asking around, to I would say asking and trying to learn and see where your network can go, and how far you can branch it.
Yeah,
I
actually,
absolutely love that. The power of conversation.
I have a quick story to share. I was talking with someone a couple weeks ago, and he had a really interesting LinkedIn story. His LinkedIn profile was good. His LinkedIn was made, and he wanted an internship. He didn't have an internship for the summer, What did he do? He went on LinkedIn. He found the profile of the CEO/president of a local company, directly messaged this person and said, I'm really interested in an internship at your company. Does your company offer internships? Does it have an internship program? Because I'd be really interested. It turns out that the CEO really loves mentoring college students. So the next day, somebody from the company reached out to the student and said, you messaged our CEO on LinkedIn. Do you have time to talk today about open positions we have? Fast forward, he got the internship. All because he sort of took that risk. Do I recommend reaching out to the CEO of a company? Not necessarily, no. But I think that just goes to show the power of LinkedIn and just putting yourself out there.
I think even personal connections and messages. I have gotten, hundreds of invitations or connections on LinkedIn, and some of them I'll look and I'll think, I've never met this individual before, or there's no kind of direct connection, so you kind of question it. So I think the more specific that you can be, if you add someone to personalize an invitation, hey, I was at the Chicago Engineers Foundation event that you spoke at, and I was really compelled by the message that you shared. I would love to connect and grow our network. Or even just specifically if there's an opportunity at that company that you're pursuing, and share that and kind of state kind of what your goals are and your aspirations. I think it really goes a long way. When Mike was speaking, it really kind of triggered in my mind something that I wanted both Mike and Matt to share with you. And it's the idea of an elevator pitch. So career fairs will be coming up, the SWE conference, so many opportunities, NSBE, opportunities for you to be able to share about yourself. And it's somewhat a little bit awkward, or can be perceived that way. But I think kind of once you get the hang of it, it's really easy. So I would love for them to maybe share what their elevator pitch is or how they would kind of approach a conversation, for you guys to be able to kind of understand the formatting of it.
Sure thing. I think we can both share it. And so I guess I'll start with my elevator pitch. Hello, my name is Michael Kadis, and I am a current junior studying industrial engineering and finance at Purdue University. I'm currently interning at Apple as a product operations intern, but have previous experience across manufacturing industry, including work at SpaceX and Tesla. I'm really interested in your company for XYZ reasons, and am, thank you for taking the time to be able to speak with me today. Yeah, and that's kind of it, is kind of how I structure it. It's kind of where I go is my name, my school year, and kind of what I'm studying. So that gives them a little bit of academic information about me. And then I go into more of my professional experiences where, I mentioned I'm currently interning at Apple and have other internship experiences. And then so that kind of gives them the personal, academic, and work experience versions of who I am. And then I want to loop it back into their company, because I tend to find it ending with talking about the company usually helps, at least in my experience, segue the conversation into their internship positions and kind of why I'm talking with them. I mean, I presume like usually when you give your elevator pitch, it's, you're looking for, you're either in an interview with another company or discussing opportunities for you to be at another company. So ending with saying why you're interested in the company kind of segues into more specific conversations that the recruiter may ask you. So it kind of, gives it a nice little transition, I feel like. Yeah, Matt, do you want to go ahead and share yours? You're muted.
I was muted. That's really funny. Oh my goodness. Wow. Actually, the first time this has ever happened to me, honestly. I've never actually been muted and started talking, but okay. Not a good way to start an elevator pitch. Elevator pitch. Hi, my name is Matt Kadis, and I study electrical engineering. My previous work experience includes internships at SpaceX, Tesla, ExxonMobil, and Johnson & Johnson. And a few things I think I've learned from those experiences are an ability to adapt quickly to new and changing environments, and also to learn new material and knowledge really quickly. And then I finish it up with something about why I'm interested in that company, or what I'm looking for at this moment. But one thing I would say is it's really easy, at least for Mike and I, to sort of put that together, because we can say like what we've already worked and what skills we've developed. It's a little more challenging though. I'm not charging. I have to put a charger in my computer. Sorry, but it is a little more challenging when you don't have that experience to sort of fill in your elevator pitch. So for me, at least, when I was a freshman, what I did was I filled it in with like a fun fact about myself, something that maybe stood out that separated myself from other people. So for example, for me, I ran a half marathon when I was 13 years old, and yes, I said that in my um, elevator pitch. And something like that might not sound the most interesting, or it might not sound like what I just stated as my elevator pitch, but it's something that can spark a conversation. For example, they might have something to say about that. Maybe they ran a half marathon. Maybe they like running. So that would be my advice. Like when you're first starting out and you don't necessarily have much to fill in the elevator pitches, maybe include a fun fact about yourself. But really, I think the bulk of it should be what you're interested in and what you're looking for.
Thank you both.
Going
Yeah.
going off of what Matt had said, this goes back to as a freshman, kind of embracing the broad perspective that you can have in terms of your experiences. You're not kind of yet focused in a particular industry or job function or major, and it's really embracing what makes you as an individual unique. Like what Matt said, he gave a really interesting fun fact about himself that is pretty rare and can spark a conversation. So I would say find something where you can share that you have a great story to, or something that you can speak to about your character or your interests and passions. And I think like that's a great way to A, spark a conversation, but then also B, separate yourself and have that recruiter kind of remember you with that story, saying that like this person stood out because they were pretty unique and embraced it. I think I heard from a recruiter, one of the things that stood out to them most in terms of recruiting freshmen was seeing this thing that she called passionate energy. And that's just naturally being yourself and talking about things that excite you or interest you, and things that are just naturally you gravitate towards. So really embracing who you are, what your passions are, rather than trying to pretend like you're a junior with all of this work experience when you're really not. That's just kind of like an interesting piece of advice and passionate energy kind of quote that I've heard from a recruiter looking when evaluating freshmen.
I love that. And I think it speaks a lot to a question that you'll get in interviews, which is tell me about yourself. And a lot of times it's like, but that's the perfect time for you to use your elevator pitch. You know who you are. And so it's the time for you to just share what makes you different, what makes you shine. And if you have either job experience while you're at school, or research experience, or a cool project that you've worked on, that's a great time to even include that as well. And if not, some of those fun facts are a really cool way, because it's true, you never know, even when you're talking about your university, you never know if the person that's interviewing you was an alumni from that university, and it could be a potential connection between the two of you. So those are just great things kind of to think about. I think now it allows us to segue a little bit for preparing for interview day. Whether virtual or in person, what would you say are kind of the top tips that you would share? I don't know, I think some of our students have heard of it and some haven't, but the STAR method for interviewing, where you're kind of answering these behavioral questions with the specific situation, task, action, and result that's really, really common. But what other recommendations might you have for them being able to interview?
I think I could see Michael smiling because he knows this is probably my favorite thing to talk about. I really like preparing for interviews. That's just me. I think it's fun. Um, the biggest piece of advice that I have that Michael and I both share and do is keeping a document of your experiences so that you can always write down and expand on your experiences. So for me, what that looks like, and when I first started this document, was I took my resume and I took all of the individual bullet points of the resume, pasted them into a Word file, and then I just started typing away, just stream of consciousness, what came to mind about that experience. So I really dove deep to think about what things happened during that experience and maybe during that project that I didn't explicitly write out on the resume. So for example, right at my freshman year, I was in a class where you're put into a team and you're supposed to build a mechanical device, which and and so what I did was I took that bullet point, put it into this document, and then elaborated about all the different challenges. I elaborated about how we worked as a team. I thought hard about where maybe I took a leadership role within the project. So for me, that would be the biggest piece of advice I have. Putting together a document that really outlines in detail all of your experiences that you've had. And I think that's really, really important because it makes you think about some of the things that are a little deeper about that experience, but are still really valuable, and that can still be like lessons learned.
Going off of what Matt had said, he is right. We both have this kind of document, and it's just something like we didn't read it off of anywhere. It's just something we decided to do one night. But basically, you have like, a certain your bullet points on your resume with your experiences. Usually they're like results, like I built, this device. I'm just being super generic here. I apologize, but it's like, I did something and had this particular result. So that's nice because it's a very abbreviated form of what you have done and it's good for a resume. How we approach this is, okay, so you drove this particular result. Well, what did you learn in that result? Kind of like underneath it, we just type everything that we remember from that experience, our key takeaways from it, what we enjoyed, what we didn't like, what struggles, even like it's kind of like as like literally a diary of that work experience. So emotionally, is there somebody that you had to work with that you just hated working with? And that happens because a very common question is, tell me a time where you had to work with someone that you didn't get along with, right? So you're kind of like just dissecting this experience, all the good, all the bad, everything you learned, what you loved about it, what was particularly challenging. And it's just a very deep moment of reflection, kind of, and that to me provides a lot of ammunition in terms of when you're in an interview, all the different questions that you could be asked, you think of all these experiences and that you've had and what you've learned from it. Because usually a bullet point in your resume can be applied to many different questions. So if you drove a particular result, you may have improved a process in doing so. And when the interviewer asks, tell me about a time you improved a process, well, that bullet point is there and that's an experience you can speak on. But maybe you also, in doing so, had to work with somebody that you didn't like. Well, if they don't ask you about a process and they ask you about, tell me a time you didn't, you worked with somebody you didn't like, you use that bullet point as well. And so Matt and I typically approach interviewing and the recruiting process with a conceptual understanding. We usually don't hardwire kind of write out explicit responses for potential questions that we can do. It's kind of how I structure my elevator pitch as well. I don't have like a 5-sentence paragraph elevator pitch that I memorize. I just memorize key talking points. And so if you can just focus on key talking points and experiences, it really helps you be highly adaptable in the interviews to be able to adjust to any of the different questions that you could be asked. I would say, sorry, I'm kind of, this is like a very extended answer, but example that I just used in an interview about a month ago was actually in one of my experiences as a program manager. I was working on developing a new product at one of the companies I was working at. And one of the questions was, tell me about a time where you had to work with people who were different than you. And when I was kind of going back into the diary and typing about this, one of the best experiences I've had in that role was that my entire team did a Myers-Briggs type indicator personality test to be able to, it's like a 16 different personalities that, kind of every individual has one of them. And that personality, it's very psychological, but that personality affects how you communicate with people, how you think, how you judge, kind of your overall work environment. And that was one of the most interesting work experiences I've had. And the people who I've worked with, I took note on their Myers-Briggs indicator and adjusted how I communicate with them based upon knowing how they like to communicate. That was one of the coolest things I've done in the internship. And I actually I gave an original answer to the interviewer, and I was like, okay, I'm thinking of this answer. But then I said, after I gave that, I was like, on second thought, like, I would also like to tell you about this Myers-Briggs indicator experience. And he said that was like the best interview or best answer he's heard across the entire pool he's interviewed, like this session for the position I was interviewing for. And it's just type of things like that where you can pick up on little nuances that, again, allow you to stand out, be unique, and make yourself that much more interesting. Sorry if that was very long. I'll give you guys the floor to talk.
I guess to summarize, Mike, the goal, what you had said was, instead of focusing on being able to answer 10 specific interview questions and focusing on, tell us about your strengths and weaknesses, tell us about a time when you had to work on a team. Instead of that, the way we approach it is building up this pool of experiences and really understanding all of our experiences really well, so that when we're asked a question, we can just go into that bucket of experiences, right, because we know it so well, grab out an experience and put the experience to the question, instead of just knowing how to answer questions. No, we really know our experience and can bring our experience to the question. So focusing on understanding your experience is really important.
I love that. And I think it provides an opportunity to answer so many of the different behavioral questions that you're asked in interviews. And I think it kind of goes to something in my mind. I think there's two types of people: those that kind of bring prepared notes with them, and then those that maybe don't. And one thing that I could maybe suggest along that, and it really just depends if you're someone that likes to have something to reference, if it's comfortable for you, and you won't necessarily be reading, a paper during an interview. But I would at least include a couple of questions that you would ask for the company and the recruiters. It could either go along of you asking the recruiter, what stands out as the most memorable part of their job, or what makes them so passionate about working for the organization. But I think also finding something specific to the role that you're applying to as well. I do see that we are kind of short on time. So before we close out, I just want to ask if anyone has any questions to ask Mike or Matt. Feel free to come off mute or to ask any questions that you might have.
I have a really quick question. So do you think it would be okay to not pursue an internship my freshman year and possibly create my own personal projects and like develop skills? And then after I've done that, I could become a better candidate for like my sophomore year, somewhere along the line.
Absolutely. I think, and depending on the company, I mean, some companies may actually prefer that. I've heard recruiters, specifically at software companies, prefer that a lot, in terms of rather than like a more formal internship experience. But yeah, I mean, if it's something that, again, this kind of goes towards the passionate energy. Like if it's something that you're really interested in and you want to pursue it or develop certain skills, like I would say go for it. I think a big thing to notice, experience is experience, whether it's research, your own personal project, or at the largest company in the world. Experience is experience, and you can definitely have a lot of takeaways in each of those different areas. So I would say it's definitely great. And with that, there's a lot of talking points that you can have in regards to those experiences that you've initiated on your own. And I think it speaks a lot towards your creativity and character and, kind of excitedness to learn. But Matt, you can also jump in
Yeah,
here
I'd
too.
say 100%. I have a friend who was doing all these cool projects his freshman year, and these were projects I had no idea how they worked. They were programming projects. There was things with Arduino and like motors, and he built some mechanical device. And even 4 years later, he just built his own like electric skateboard. And I'm sure you've probably seen people around those with campus. He built one himself. So his projects, he wasn't doing that freshman year, but he was doing a ton of personal projects that he just thought were really fun to him his freshman year. He really enjoyed it. I'll be honest, was spending like a lot of time on it. Like I don't know how much he slept, but it's because he really enjoyed it. He was doing something he was really, really interested in. And he's worked 3 internships at a really, really, really large tech company because of those projects and how he's been able to talk about those.
To add to that, also, I'd like to point out, as much as possible, I would document like all that you're doing. Maybe create a blog or create some type of PowerPoint or document, because a lot of companies now will allow you to submit personal URLs or personal portfolios, whatever it may look like. So whether that's a PowerPoint or kind of a CAD model or software program or a blog, like they're asking for, do you have anything that you've created on your own that you can share with us? So, I mean, I'm always like very supportive. I think we both are of personal projects. That's kind of why we chose engineering. We were brothers and probably drove our parents a little too crazy with personal projects going around the house. Like I specifically remember accidentally coloring our white dog red. So that was very like an interesting personal project Matt and I could share about. But definitely the documentation part is pretty great because it allows you to bring the recruiter into your project, kind of like sharing at the end of your summer. If you can create some type of file that shows this is what I've done, this is what I learned from it. And a big point too is failures, kind of identifying what you struggled with and how you overcame that. Like that is textbook, like amazing things to present to recruiters or researchers for getting an internship. Like it's very highly sought after.
Thank you.
And as always, I would love for you to continue to stay connected with Calculated Genius. Let us know if you're having challenges in your internship search, or anything kind of along the way in the process. If you have an interview coming up and even you just wanted to run ideas past someone, just know we're a resource here for you. But thank you again, Matt and Mike, and students. I'm just really happy that you were able to join us tonight.
Thank you, Kelly, and students as well. We really appreciate the opportunity to kind of share our experiences. So like Kelly mentioned, feel free to connect with either one of us. I'm super happy to chat or help you out in any way going forward. But yeah, thank you, Kelly, for setting this up as well. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you all, and I hope you have a great night.